Hello, everyone. I'm so excited to be back for yet another episode of Come As You Are. And October, we've been talking about bullying and bias. So I am particularly excited to introduce you to Aree Bly, the founder or owner and or janitor and or secretary of Alignment Ally. And I met Aree when she wrote a blog for NAWA, that's NAWA. And if you don't know them, check them out. It's nawa.org about unconscious bias. And so I thought, who better to talk about this than someone that's in the industry that knows how that manifests and that also has done some work on discovering and talking about bias. So, Aree, welcome to the podcast. And I would love to hear where your journey with bias began or like understanding it for yourself.
Thank you. Yeah, it's great to be here. And I think it just kind of, I don't know, it snuck up on me because it wasn't something that I was aware of that I really was looking at or for, or even directly and very prominently aware of it happening to me. But as I look at it, it's like, okay, yeah, I see it all around now as, as I've become more aware of it. And as someone who came up through, a very technical, analytical career, it's easy for me to think, and I think a lot of actuaries are the same way, that we think with our brain, we think about things, and therefore we're not as susceptible to biases. But I almost think that because our brains are so in tune with, gathering facts and recognizing patterns and creating assumptions off of that, like maybe we're more susceptible to it. Because it's really, the biases are just our brain's way of taking shortcuts. It's our brain's way of saying, oh, I've seen this before. This is what's happening. This is where, this is the underlying information that I can glean from whatever situation. And it's not a negative thing. It's not a positive thing. It can have negative impacts, but it's just the way our brain works. And I think I also, once I started realizing that it wasn't an intentional thing, it's not like someone intentionally creating a assumption about someone else. It's just the way that their brain works. And it's like, okay, well, let's bring it more out into the open and be aware of the impact that it has on ourselves, our others, our ability to connect, and our ability to create kind of a place where people feel like they are a part of everything, right? So that they're not being left on the sidelines because of these biases.
I think it's so key that you pointed out that it's not negative and it's not positive. It's just what we do. And it's so true because if we think about how many decisions we have to make as humans, just walking around in our daily lives, I think we can point to, oh, I decided to have a chicken salad sandwich, or I decided to have a specific beverage. But it's more than that, right? It's like, which room are you going to go into, and how far are you going to walk, and at what pace? And you're not always making those conscious decisions, but that's how some of this forms. And I think when we hear the word bias, we automatically think bad. But it's more about just being aware of our perspective and how we show up in the world and being able to kind of look at it through a lens. So knowing all of that, how do you look at life a little bit differently now that you've kind of taken a step back and gone, oh, wow, I do have some of these built in?
Yeah. It's funny because I try and come at it, first of all, with curiosity. I love to learn more about myself, and especially as I've, moved past my actuarial career and into the coaching and the speaking. It's like, it's interesting to see how all of this shows up, and it's interesting to learn more about myself, because I think the way that I can grow best and the way that I can operate best is by knowing more about myself and then being able to understand where I'm coming from, especially now that I'm in different situations. It was very easy to ignore biases almost when I was in, companies working with actuaries. So I was, you already have this bias of, well, they're smart, they've gotten through the exams, therefore I make assumptions about what they can do and what they can't. And, they're typically, I was in some, very It was, a mix of men and women, but everybody kind of had that underlying assumption that, okay, if you've got this title, if you've got this certification, you already get some credit. So that kind of took away some of the biases. Now, I there were times in my career where I was working with people who, because I was a woman, or because I did some international work, because I was American and not, Brazilian, they made assumptions about who I was, where I was coming from, what I knew, what I didn't know. And then it's just a matter of recognizing that and saying, okay, how can we, help each other know where we're coming from and understand the background so that we can then work together, because it's really what it's all about, right? Figuring out how to work together to create the best solution for whatever you're working on, whether it's working with your physician who may have certain biases, working with other people in your community, working with people in your organization. They all come, and you yourself come with certain biases. So once you can air those and get curious about, that's funny, why did you assume that I was, this type of person? Or why would you assume that I'm introverted just because I'm an actuary, or whatever it is? So getting curious about, okay, why are you thinking that? And then that slows them and yourself down, and you can kind of understand a little bit more about where it's coming from, because we're in this world where speed is of the essence, right? We want to get on to the next thing because we've got so many things on our plate to do. So we rely on those shortcuts that our brain is taking. And those can lead us down the wrong paths when we really want to be creating a little more connection, a little more understanding, a little more seeing new perspectives, right? Getting a little more creative.
I think there's two things in there that are super important. And one is being curious. Like you've mentioned that a couple of times now. And I think when we're so quick to react, again with the speed, right? When we're so quick to react, sometimes that can be defensive. Sometimes it can come from a place of insecurity or maybe a place of hurt. So being curious is great, because instead of immediately just assuming that they think that because of, I don't know, X, Y, Z, it could be something completely innocuous, and we don't need to react the way that we do. And I think the other thing that you mentioned too is about the speed. And that's where I think pausing to just sit with it for a second is incredibly important. And I am guilty of not pausing often. I think, especially in the world in which we have a lot of speed, it's almost detrimental to pause, right? We've set ourselves up for this place that if you take a moment, what are you missing? Like FOMO, right? Like, what are we missing out on by taking a second? But I think we miss out on learning more about ourselves, maybe learning about others, by not just taking a second and sitting and going, what do you think they actually meant by that? What are the facts of the situation? What do I have control over versus not? So what do you think would be a great first step for somebody that is starting to uncover this for themselves? Maybe they're early on in the journey of understanding, oh, I do have bias. Or maybe they've been working on it for a little bit and just don't know where to go next. I know a lot of that pertains to the work that you do. So I'm curious, as a coach, as a speaker, as a leader, as somebody that has tackled these own things for herself, what would you tell for somebody that's just starting that journey?
I think the best thing that you can do is accept that you don't know everything and go explore, like meet people that aren't like you, and do it open. Like, don't go in, assuming that you'll learn one thing or another, or assuming that they will break your bias. They might meet whatever you were assuming. I don't know, but go in and at least expose yourself to different people, different situations, different, get different comfort zones. Get out of your comfort zone and say, okay, my intention for this week is to meet somebody that intimidates me. Why are they intimidating you? Well, because they are a CEO and I'm not. And, but when you actually talk to them, you learn a little bit more about where they're coming from, and you can be open to learning, more about their background, or, open up. You've got so many opportunities, just being friendly, saying hi to someone in the grocery store that doesn't look like you, that doesn't act like you, that doesn't dress like you, that drove up in a different car, whatever it is, just say hi. and
Yeah.
it doesn't have to be a half-hour conversation. It can just be slowly chipping away at intentionally meeting and finding
Yeah.
people having those conversations.
Yeah. Because I think, yes, absolutely. And I think the key for us to understand too, because I know when I was still very early on that journey, and I don't want to say that I've made it very far, I guess, but when I was still first like understanding this for myself, several mistakes I made were when I started that conversation in the grocery store or started to try to network outside of my comfort zone, I guess would be the best way to put it. If I didn't receive back what I thought I was going to receive, sometimes I would shut down. Or
Right.
like there's a fear of rejection, there's a fear of lack of trust, and like putting yourself out there in a vulnerable way and admitting that you don't know something. I had a
Right.
conversation with somebody earlier in the insurance industry, and as you know, we spend a lot of time in this industry determining fault, right?
Yes.
So
Yes.
making mistakes and then admitting to those is very difficult and kind of the antithesis of what we tend to do in insurance.
Right.
So, what would you say to somebody that maybe has experienced a level of, I'll say rejection? It may not be as difficult as that, but they've experienced resistance to something like that. Um, Whether it, is the conversation on the grocery store or somebody at work, how can they move past that discomfort and keep going and continue to be curious?
The first word that comes to mind is grace.
Mm,
It's a practice, and you never will, be perfect at it. So it's really give yourself the grace to recognize that this is just, it's new to you. It's new to other people. Other people are used to you operating in a certain way. They're used to people staying in their lanes, right? So it just takes giving yourself a little bit of grace and recognizing that you don't always have to do this. It's okay to kind of take a break and say, okay, I'm just gonna give myself a little self-care today and not push myself. It's okay to kind of do it in spurts. You don't have to make the shift. But then also just keep doing it. Little steps. You're not going to get there in one fell swoop. You're just going to take little steps. They'll all build. They're like little building blocks that will slowly feed your subconscious new information, and you're, in the background of your brain, you're going to be rewiring some of those biases, and you'll
mm,
start to slowly see it. I notice it more in just my awareness of when I do it. I was talking to a friend. We had some friends visit, dear friends from years ago, and we had kids together, and the wife was an actuary, the husband was a lawyer, and he actually stopped working when they had kids and stayed at home to take care of their kids. And when I introduced them to, some other friends of ours here in town, they asked him, well, what do you do? And he said, I was a lawyer. And I said something along the lines of, well, and he also stayed home to help with the kids. And I was like, why did I put that word help in there? Like, he was
yeah, good call
the
out.
caretaker, but I had to take a step back and apologize. I'm like, I'm sorry, Dave. It was like, that wasn't what I meant. Like, I don't know. It was obviously some sort of bias of mine that's like, why I couldn't just say he took care of the kids. I don't know. But, give yourself some grace and recognize that it's just a practice. And the more that you practice it, the more you'll see it. And the easier it is to kind of recognize that each one is just a little block. It's okay if you mess up on one little block, the wall, and, it'll all fit together and continue to grow.
And I think it's beautiful that we don't know everything, right? If
Yes.
we held all of the information, I think life would be far more boring. Um,
Right.
we have to be able to take a look at this journey, I think, with a little bit of joy too. It
Hmm.
shouldn't be this self-imposed, well, I don't know it yet, and I've got to know it all. And if I don't know it by this time, then I'm worth
Right.
nothing, or I haven't done the work that I need to do. So much of the work that you're talking about, that we're talking about here, is ongoing, as you pointed out, because you probably at that point in your life already knew that you had some biases and still went there. Um,
Yes. Yes.
and I love the example that you use because it is non-traditional and we don't often see that. And I think in society, when we're used to making decisions just off of default, off of that background brain that we have going,
Yeah.
it can hamper growth for individuals that wouldn't commonly be in that situation. And that's why this work is important, right? It's not just about the fact that people that don't look like us or that don't act like us can have the same place in society. It's also so that we're all able to do what we want. It
Yes.
wouldn't probably have been common for him to step down. It's still not super common, but when he did, it wouldn't have been common.
Right.
And people may
Right.
not have accepted that freely. So I think that's a really, really good call
Right.
out. Um, I'm curious how other biases show up because we've talked about it in terms of like in your daily life and learning and seeing. How do you see it manifest in work? And how can we start to undo that?
Um, well, so what I see, um, and I don't know, do you want me to go back to like work as an actuary or work, working
You
with
can,
individuals?
you know what, this is the insurance industry. I think we can talk about some
Yeah.
actuaries here. Yeah,
Yeah.
right?
Um, right. So what I see, um, and it's interesting. I think I see it a lot in kind of assuming, the personalities of people and how people might react. I think it happens. I'm trying to think of a good example of when um, when specific to work. I think what I tend to see is people are scared of differences. And that
Mm,
might, it probably goes to some of that affinity bias. It's like we see someone who sounds like us or who looks like us or went to the same school as us, and we therefore kind of feel like, okay, they are like us. We can fill in all the blanks with what we know about ourselves. We're like, they're okay, that's fine. And when we come across someone who's completely different, we don't know what to do. And so our first instinct is to kind of take a step back and
mm,
not move in to learn more. So, I've come across a handful and now I love them dearly, but at first, like an actuary or someone that's very gregarious and very outgoing and very extroverted, and you're like, okay, this is wild. This is like, you're just like, I don't know what to do with you. And therefore, and I'm more comfortable over here. So I'm just going to keep my distance. And what that does is that distance makes it harder to work together because,
mm,
you're kind of worried about saying the wrong thing or doing the wrong thing or interpreting things the wrong way because they're just so different. And it's so hard for your brain to wrap around the fact that, okay, you're an actuary, but you don't quite fit the mold. So I don't know what to do. And I think that's again where when I start leaning into curiosity or when you start finding things that are in common, it's like, oh my gosh, you have a dog. Let's bond on that first. And then, have the conversations of getting to know a little bit more about them. And also, the other thing that's huge, I think, is having some sort of standards, for the work aspect itself. And I think you see this a lot in hiring, when you are interviewing 5 candidates for the same, entry level position, and you kind of click with one person's personality, but you don't click with the other. Like your assumption is that, okay, this person will be a better fit, or,
mm.
you're going to bring in the person that kind of meets your expectation and kind of makes you more comfortable, when I think sometimes what we need is the diverse perspectives and the diverse insights coming in to help you be a little bit more creative and help you see the challenges from new perspectives. So I think just knowing the value of the diversity. And I learned that, as I got farther along in my career, I was like, wait a minute, I never thought of this problem in that way. But if I hadn't had certain conversations with people who had different experiences, I never would have known where my blind blind spots were, right? So when
Right.
working on a problem, it's like, okay, I didn't think about this area of the country having this dynamic, this, socioeconomic norm. I just thought, well, it's a city, therefore this is what's going on. But once you have somebody who's from there or somebody who can speak to it a little differently, you start understanding a little bit more of the nuances of the challenges at hand, the work problems at hand, even. So you can kind of understand things deeper.
Yeah, that's so true. And I mean, you're in Colorado and I'm in
Yes.
Illinois, and those two states act so differently from an insurance standpoint.
Absolutely.
Not to mention regionally how things happen. I know on the coast we've got a lot of national carriers, and then here in the Midwest we have a whole bunch of regional carriers, and there's a very different experience on how that
Right.
operates, not just state to state and laws, but then how the culture of it feels. So
Yeah.
I'm really, really grateful for you coming on and having this conversation with me, because I think it's something that we often don't talk about in the public eye in insurance. And it's a
Right.
necessary conversation, knowing where we're at in our journey as an industry as a
Right.
whole.
Right.
So, how can people find you more, Ari? Like, how can they interact with you after hearing your conversation and knowing, okay, this is somebody that's really thinking about things a little bit differently? Maybe they want coaching, maybe they want to hear you speak more. How do they do that?
Two places to find me. One is obviously on LinkedIn. I'm always out there. It's under Aree Bly, Areebly. But I also have a website, areebly.com, which talks about a lot of the speaking that I do. If you want to have a conversation about how I can help, bring some ideas to your teams, do workshops, whatever might help. Some of it is on, kind of understanding the, biases, DEI. Some of it's just on understanding yourself and kind of bringing more of yourself to what you do, to make things a little bit more sustainable for you. Because a lot of this is also people are scared to show themselves because of the bias that they may receive. So as we can start to get more comfortable with showing ourselves a little more whole, then maybe that'll also start to break down some of those biases. But yeah,
Yeah, and
so
then
website and LinkedIn.
yeah, and then maybe we can all have a little more grace with each other, right?
Absolutely. Yes.
Well, thank you so much for the time today. I super appreciate your information and feedback. It's been a delight. And you can also find Ari if you go to our website on our
Yes.
resource partners page. So you can go there or on LinkedIn or her website, as she mentioned. But until next time, Ari, thanks for being here.
Thank you, Alyssa. It was my pleasure.